Hi there! You might own yourself an FX Pantera, maybe an FX Dynamic in some form, or you already own the very beautiful FX King. Straight out of the box, we all know they produce already a lot of power, which will be suited for most shooters out there. But we know some of you are always looking for a little bit of extra power, and therefore we've got this, the FX Slug Power Kit for the dynamic range. So the Slug Power Kit for the FX Dynamic range with part number 21056 is suited for the FX Pantera, the FX Dynamic and the King, as they share the same block. Let's open up the bag and see what you get inside. You get 3 little bags, and the first very noticeable one is this one right here, and that is a heavier hammer. Now that hammer is actually a tungsten hammer, and the main reason why you would like to install with your Slug Power Kit a tungsten hammer is because you would like to create even more power than the FX Dynamic range already has straight out of the box. Therefore, you will be cranking up your regulator pressure and you need more force to open that valve, and that's the reason why we need a tungsten hammer. Second bag right here is a new probe, a pin probe style or slug probe as we know it, like this. And something else you will get in the bag are 2 little O-rings. Now these O-rings have to slide over the probe into that groove right there. I'll do that just in a second. And the biggest reason why is because of these 2 sleeves right here. These sleeves are actually caliber sleeves, so you can change your probe to a different caliber. So it's actually an all-in-one kit for 3 different calibers. The probe, just like this, is a 22 caliber. And when you use the medium sleeve to put over it just like this, you now have yourself a 25 caliber, and with a bigger sleeve you now have yourself a 30 caliber. The reason how they are held in place is with one of these O-rings. So you take out one of those O-rings, slide them over the probe just like this, all the way down into that little groove right there, just like this. And now that's, for instance, the 30 caliber. You slide this over in a twisty motion, it just snaps into place. This O-ring creates enough force in order to keep that sleeve in place, so don't worry about that. So with the overview of the FX Slug Power Kit for the dynamic range done, we can go ahead and install it. As an example for this video, I'll be using the FX Pantera 700mm 22 caliber. I will go through it step by step so you can follow along very easily and do it safely, of course. If after watching this video you still don't feel comfortable doing it yourself, we always strongly recommend having it done by a trained technician. So let's get this power kit installed. Right, let's get started. Now, one of the most important things is safety, of course, and therefore always make sure there are no pellets in the breech, the rifle is not cocked and it has been put on safe. We will be disassembling a lot of parts on this FX Pantera, and therefore we have to drain the complete system out of air. The first thing you gotta do is remove your bottle, of course. Depending on which model you have a bottle at the back or a bottle at the front. Just start by removing your bottle. With the bottle removed, you can see on the bottle pressure that it's reading 0, but our plenum, which is a massive one on the Pantera, of course, is still reading 150 bar, and therefore we also have to drain that plenum. The reason I like to do it, or the way I like to do it, is by cracking the regulator ever so slightly counterclockwise, and then it will release all the air from the back. So with the Pantera and the dynamic block, your regulator sits in front of your trigger, not like with the impact on the back side. Simply put it in, quarter of a turn, and you can hear it bleeding out from the back. Once it released all the air, you can always verify, and you can see now on our regulator gauge it is reading 0, so we know that the plenum is out of air. Next thing we will do is remove that grip. As I mentioned before, we will be removing a lot of parts in order to get to the internals, and the first thing I will remove is that grip to get it out of the way to get more access to other parts. So stick in the Allen key from the back. With the grip out of the way, we can focus ourselves on removing the back end of the Pantera. Therefore, we'll have to remove these two little cover plates to get access to those screws that hold this block onto that dynamic block itself. So let's go ahead, remove those four little screws. Put the parts and the screws together to a safe place so you can always reallocate the right screws for the right location afterwards. With those two little parts removed, we now have access to those two screws at the bottom right here that make up, or the connection, from this little block to the dynamic block itself. And then the next thing that we'll be removing is those four screws, so we can completely remove this back part. 3mm Allen key, and with those parts removed, you can easily fit your Allen key inside now. Find a hole, start undoing them. Take your time doing this. As you can see, it's every time a quarter of a turn. Right, and with that done, you can slide both screws backwards and gently take them out. Those are the two bottom ones. Now we still have the two top ones right there and one right there. Same procedure, but a little bit easier to access. And with the last screw undone, we can separate the back part from the block itself. Again here, make sure you keep the correct screws for the correct part, and always beware of this little O-ring you see right there, because that is actually what seals your air between the back part and the block itself, going through that hole there at the bottom that you can see. With the back end removed, it gives us access to that plug you see right here, and that we can remove by undoing that screw you see right there. Simply undo with a few turns, and this little block should come out just like this. It's actually just a basic plug to make it a little bit more aesthetic and nice to cover up the hole right there. Now this allows us to slide out much of the internals right from there. One of the parts we need to remove is the trigger, in order to be able to slide all the internals out from the back side, as that sear will catch on the hammer and therefore blocking the way out. So therefore we need to remove the trigger, and the first thing we need to remove is that trigger guard. Simply turn it upside down. The trigger guard is held in place by 3 normal screws you see right here, and then one hidden underneath the grip. So that's why it was also important to remove that grip. So let's go ahead with the first 3. And then that screw at the back still. With those screws loose, you can simply lift off your trigger guard. Keep those screws in place so you know which one has to go where. With that done, we can remove the trigger, and the trigger is held in place with some small little pins that go straight through the block, held in place with those tiny little grub screws you see right there. So we'll start by removing those tiny 3 little ones. It's a 1.5 millimeter. Simply unscrew them. Make sure you don't lose them, as they are very small, like this. And now we can push those pins out from the back side. The first one I will push out is this one. This is what holds the complete trigger mechanism inside. And then the second one it sits on top of the sear, and the third one is what holds the sear in location in the block. So to push them out, you need a very sharp and pointy thing to stick into that hole, and gently push on it, and as you can see on that side, that pin starts to come out. At this point, I like to hold my trigger a little bit and take that pin out all the way, gently release it, and make sure you don't lose the spring on the back side of your trigger. Put it together to the side with that pin, maybe put it through it so you don't lose it. The next pin, the next pin we have right there sits right on top of the sear, as this is your sear, and that pin holds it from coming all the way down. So let's push that one out of the way as well, like so. And then I like to use some tweezers to grab on to the sear you have down there in that block. I hope you can see it well on camera. That's the sear. So I hold down my tweezers on the sear, push out that pin from that side, and lift up your sear. Now do note in which orientation it came out. I will address it when we reassemble, because that's very important. Put everything to the side together with the tiny screws and the pins. Now the pins itself you can mix up because they all have exactly the same length. Something to point out with your trigger completely removed and your trigger guard is that spring you see right here. That's what makes up the safety, and underneath that spring there should be a tiny ball bearing. So make sure when handling your rifle it doesn't fall out or it doesn't get lost. So put it as well in a safe place. Then the next thing I'll be removing, in order to get all the internals out and swap out the pellet probe, which is now a pellet probe and will be replacing to a pin probe, is getting that cocking handle out. There are two screws holding that cocking lever in place. One for the linkage arm you have right there, which corresponds with a grub screw that sits inside that hole when you align it correctly, and then you have one pin that goes through the cocking handle itself. First one I'll be removing is that one here at the front, so I hope you can see it on camera. Move your cocking arm until you can see that grub screw, insert your Allen key in it, and simply undo it. And there you have it. And at this point the cocking linkage already is loose, and now we still have to address the back part right there. The back part with the same Allen key, you have a pin that sits through the cocking handle right there, and you have a grub screw sitting right on top of it to keep it from backing out. So the first one you take out is like a stopper or a blocker, and the second one underneath should be the same pin as we had at the front. Take it out all the way, same pin, and now you can simply slide out the complete cocking arm. Put all those parts safely to the side. The next thing we need to remove is now that quick tune system. That quick tune system interacts with a spring inside and with a hammer, and therefore we need to remove it in order to take all those internals out. The first thing we'll do is remove the power wheel itself. Power wheel, simply take the middle screw out. I do advise when you're taking that screw out, hold your hand on it, push down on it with the screw loose. Gently lift it up. Turn it around. And now the two ball bearings stick, as you can see, still to the block itself, thanks to a little bit of grease. So make sure you don't lose them while in the process. Underneath you have two small springs. I will also remove them so you don't lose them and you can see what I'm talking about. Two tiny springs like this. Many small parts that make up for a great system. Put them safely to the side so you don't lose those. Next thing, screw we have to remove, and that's a little bit hidden. That is inside the block. Don't know if you can see it very well on camera, but there down inside there is a small grub screw. Let me see if I can take a picture for you so it's a little bit easier. And that screw we have to take out completely. And reason being is, you will see in just a second, that screw runs through the block here with the markings on it and prevents it from taking it out. So remove that screw completely. Tiny little screw. And the next one to take out that quick tune system is this one right here. This one is what holds in that back part. So with the same Allen key, go into the hole right here. You will find the tiny Allen key. You don't have to take it out completely, just turn it out far enough so it stops from blocking this. So just release all the pressure from your quick tune system, and then it's as easy as let me see if I can do on camera. Push back on it, and pull it outwards like this. You can see it starts to disassemble. That ball bearing is also important, and I will just explain in a second where it comes from. Compress all the parts together like this and take them out. The little ball bearing that you just saw jumping out from me comes from that location right there, and that small ball bearing is what makes up for the clicky feeling while turning on that little wheel. So that ball bearing, put it also safely to the side so you don't lose it. And with that quick tune system, everything is now free to slide out from the back. That little block you see right here, that block is what catches your quick tune system in, and that was where that tiny screw goes all the way through. Then you have your spring that we'll be reusing, and the hammer that we will be replacing. The next part, or something else that has to come out, is your probe system. Simply take with your fingers, push back on it. There is a small ball bearing detent with that screw right there that holds it a little bit in place, so you might help it along with an Allen key or something past that small indentation, jumping out your cocking assembly, which holds your probe. Right, with all the internals out of the Pantera, we can now start swapping around the parts with the Slug Power Kit. First thing, the hammer, of course, we'll change it out for the tungsten hammer, just like this. The spring stays original, and now we have to focus our attention to that pin probe. The pin probe, since my Pantera is a 22 caliber, I'm going to keep it in 22 caliber configuration. So I don't need that little O-ring in that groove, because I don't need to slide any of the caliber sleeves over it. So we're going to replace the original one with the pin probe one, and that we have to do by undoing that tiny grub screw you see right there in order to take that pellet probe out. Take a 1.5mm Allen key. Now take very good Allen keys, as these screws are so tiny and sometimes they can be pretty tight, and so you don't want to strip them out, because that's a nice nightmare to get it fixed. So just undo it. Don't have to take it completely out, and just pull out your probe. As you can see, it has like a not really like square shape, but it has like two rounded parts at the top, so your probe can only fit in the one correct orientation inside, as it has the same cutout as you have in that block right there. Same counts for that pin probe, which can only go in one way, but for a pin probe actually it doesn't really matter. Put it down all the way, maybe hold your finger on it, tighten up on the Allen key. Tight is good enough, don't overdo it so you don't strip out the tiny screw, just like this, and now we are ready for assembly. Now for assembly, we're going to start off with our cocking handle. Reason why is because that little pin right here catches on this part, and that's what pulls your hammer spring and your hammer backwards in order to get your rifle cocked, of course. So this part has to go in first, as this has to sit in front of this part. So you're going to slide it in right from the back, the top one with that pin down, of course, and you're going to feel a slight resistance. That is because that small ball bearing and spring that's right here, which will interact with that divot you see right there. So push it in, you will feel a small resistance, push it past it, and you can maybe help it along with an Allen key. A little bit more forward, and what you're looking for is actually where that pin has to be, that holds down on your cocking lever. And as you can see, there we have that hole lined up. Make sure it's nicely in the middle, a little bit backwards, twist it a little bit. Perfect, just like this. Then we're going to take the cocking linkage with all the necessary parts. The cocking linkage goes in this way, depending if you have it on the left or right hand configuration. And the first thing I would like to do is to get that back one in. The back one, simply slide it in between your block right there. And then what you're aiming for is, of course, to line up that hole together with the other hole there. I sometimes use an Allen key just to guide it already, make sure I'm in position. Then I take this little screw with that pin that goes right through, start it up, and make sure it goes through that cocking linkage. Don't overdo it, it has to be there just like this, because we have that stopper right here that goes on top of it to prevent it from backing out. So no need to crank down on it. Perfect like this. Next thing we gotta do is connect this part with our cocking arm or cocking linkage inside. So you wanna slide it in. And the trick here is, of course, also to line it up. Once you have that hole aligned, I like to stick the Allen key as well into it. Make sure nothing moves. Take that pin, guide it in, make sure the threads connect, and that cocking linkage is in. Perfect. Tighten it all the way down. Same here, don't overdo it, as you don't want to strip that part. It will be a nightmare to get it out. Make sure it cycles, that screw is deep enough and it doesn't drag on anything. Perfect. Next up, we're going to put all the rest inside. So we take the hammer housing, the hammer goes in just like this. You can, of course, use just a little bit of grease. Doesn't have to be a lot, just a little bit, so everything slides smooth inside. The hammer followed by your spring, same here, just a light coating of some lubrication. The hammer goes in like this, and that's that block that connects together with that quick tune system that has to sit just right there. Just a little bit more grease on the hammer housing here, Just a light film, doesn't have to be too much. You don't want to overdo it and create some too much grease inside your block. And take now the bottom hole, slide in the complete assembly. Sometimes have to wiggle it a little bit in order for it to slide all the way forward. That block goes in behind. Make sure it aligns with that cutout facing to you, just like this. And now we are ready to install our quick tune system. So the quick tune system made up out of a bunch of very tiny little parts. So make sure you have all of them. Let's go over the quick tune system. Maybe it has been falling apart, and as you can see, we have that end block where this little spring goes inside, just like this, and then the spring fits into the tube, which turns on that little wheel right there, like so. And this is what has to go together into that block. Remember, we had a spring and a small ball bearing. We're going to put that back in. So we're going to start off with that little spring. That spring has to sit right there in that little opening here. Just like so. Then we have the small ball bearing, like this. As you can see, we first put the spring in and the ball bearing on top of it. Now that ball bearing is very important in order for you to get that clicky feeling on your quick tune system. The quick tune system, the easiest way to put it in, of course, is to compress it a little bit. Make sure this cutout right here fits into that opening of that block that we slid in from the back. It can be a little bit fiddly. Compress it all the way. Look for the opening in that block, and just like this, everything snaps together. The clicky feeling is there. Perfect. Now, in order for it to lock it into place, let's not forget that tiny Allen key here at the bottom, 1.5 millimeter. I'm going to screw that in because that creates some tension on that back part and holds that in place. Very long threads. Maybe an idea is to put your thumb on it when you close it down, so it's nice and flush with the body. And then we still have this little guy here, which goes in from the back part, as we when I showed you that picture, which goes in that block, going through this part right here, fixing it down. So let's get that screw in. Like so. Also right here, guys, these are very tiny screws. Don't overdo it. Tight is good enough. Make sure you have springy feeling on your quick tune system. And now we can put back that power wheel. The power wheel, if you remember, also existed out of a bunch of small parts. You have 2 springs, 2 ball bearings, the power wheel, and the screw that goes through it. So we're going to start off with the 2 springs. Let's take one first, and you have 2 openings, one right here, one right there, and those springs sit right into those openings, like this. 2 springs back inside, and now you want to align those 2 ball bearings on top of those springs. Sometimes with a little bit of grease, you can also stick them to your power wheel and put it on together just like this. But I'm going to take a little bit of grease on my fingers and put them right on top of the springs. Like this. 2 ball bearings right on top of those springs. Then what you want to do is pull back on that quick tune system so the opening is completely free. And you're ready to put your power wheel back in. I know mine was on 13. It doesn't make such a big difference, but it's always good to put it back where it was. Now, of course, I need the correct Allen key. And tighten it down. While you're tightening it down, always keep pressure on your power wheel so it doesn't come back and the ball bearings don't align perfectly. With it done up, make sure it clicks. Perfect. Next up, we'll put the trigger and the sear back in. Also, a lot of small parts. Your sear, the pins to put everything in place, and the little screws to lock it down. The first thing you want to put in is that sear, of course. So let's turn our gun around. The sear will come to sit between this little bridge right here, and will have to be locked down with a pin that goes through from that side. The trick is to set it deep enough so it aligns perfectly in order to get that pin through. So the first thing I like to do is take that pin, slide it in already, so it starts to come and peek there out of that little hole. Then your sear has to sit in this orientation with that cutout facing you, and it has to go in just like this. This is a game of patience. There are people who are very skilled in this and do this very easily, but it can take a little bit of time and patience in order to get that thing in. And just like this, that is in. So let's push it all the way in. Make sure it sits nice on top of it. So your sear is right there. Push it in like this all the way, and then that second pin goes into that middle hole right there, like this, and it is actually what stops your sear from falling all the way down and right onto that cutout that we have shown before. Now at that point we can put the trigger back in, and we have one more pin that goes through that Pac-Man kind of shape there, just like this. That spring sits on top of the back side of that sear. I don't know if you can see it very well. There on the back side into that rounded cutout, that's where the spring has to sit on top of. Then we can push it down and put that pin through from there. So same here. I start with the pin more or less aligned just like this. Then we put that spring into that back part right there, push down on it, look for the hole to put your pin through, wiggle it just a little bit, like this. Perfect. Push the pin all the way to the bottom. Now if you find yourself having trouble getting it in, it might be that that Pac-Man is just a little bit out of orientation. Therefore, if you loosen this screw just a little bit, you will feel it goes in much smoother. So I have done this before, so let me do it right back up with a simple Allen key. hold your trigger so it doesn't get out of alignment, and tight is good enough. To finish it all up, we have to put those little guys back in. And the third one. Nicely, everything locked, so those pins can't come out anymore. At this point, you can try your cocking mechanism. It still cocks perfectly. Now be careful releasing that trigger. One more time. Cocks perfectly. Releasing that trigger. There is one more thing I would really like to point out at this moment, is that we have installed that heavy tungsten hammer, and you don't want to strike that valve with too much force. So I would always advise, go back on your power wheel just like this all the way down when you start tuning your rifle again, to see where your power wheel has to sit in order for it to be at the optimal position. Overpowering this, first of all, it's not good for the gun, and second of all, it will also drop the velocity again, and then you won't reach the higher velocities that you're aiming for, and the reason why you install this kit, of course. So next, we can put our trigger guard back on, and the spring and ball bearing from the safety, not to forget, of course. So your safety right here, you can see maybe they're moving into that hole. And what you want to do is you want to put that ball bearing first, like this, and then that spring on top of it, like so. You can see you're in the correct hole when you see that spring moving while maneuvering that safety lever. Now, this gets held in place without any screws. It's just the trigger guard that sits on top of it, which holds it nicely in position. So next up, you take your trigger guard, put it nicely on top, start the screws, don't put them down all the way, just make sure all the threads start before tightening anything up, as you don't want anything to bind or to cross thread. Don't forget the back one, like this, the back one still. Again here, this is all aluminum, don't overdo it, as you don't want to strip out any of these threads. Then most of the gun is back together. We still have this, I will call it a beauty cap, that sits here on top to close off the top hole right there. Now it can twist around on you, make sure you align it nicely, and then you can do up the tiny Allen key that holds that in place. Like this. And we're almost there, so let's put that back end back on. And that is easily done by aligning the two pieces again with the 4 screws that go through those holes. Now, very important, before you put it back together, make sure that O-ring is here still in place, there is no debris in between, it is nice and lubricated so it can seal properly. Maybe we start off with the 2 bottom ones, so the screws slide in just like this. Align that part. So at this point they're just touching up, and before tightening these down I would like to get the 4 top screws first also in place. The 2 top screws, I'm sorry. First start them up with your fingers so you know the threads are connecting. And with those screws in, we can also now tighten up all the rest. With the 4 screws tightened up, We now have to put those two cover plates back. The two little cover plates with the 4 screws. They just fit in snugly, just like this. And the other one from the other side. And just screw in the 4 little screws. Like so. Then, for easy of use, I've taken the cheek piece out, like this. And the last part we're going to put on is our grip again. And now with all that done, we can put our bottle back on. Now, do keep in mind, since we have that huge plenum over the barrel, keep enough air on hand, as it will have drained most of it from this little tiny bottle. So start by screwing it on. Until you feel it touching the valve. Like this. Now it is possible when you just screw on your barrel like this, the air will rush out of the barrel. Therefore, what I like to do is I like to cock the Pantera, make sure it is on safe, and then screw on that bottle. At this point, we can safely decock the rifle again, like this. And that's it, guys. That's how to install the Slug Power Kit in the FX Dynamic block. In example, this FX Pantera we used in the video. I hope this video can be a guide for some of you to install it yourself and maybe give you an idea how it gets installed. If after watching this video you still don't feel comfortable doing it yourself, we do strongly advise you to hand it over to a trained technician and have it done for you. If you have any questions regarding the Slug Power Kit itself or the installation process, don't hesitate to put it in the comment section down below, and I'll be more than happy to answer all of your questions as soon as I can. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on the future videos. I thank you for watching and hope to see you back in the next one. Bye.